Not because of anything graphic, but purely due to how emotionally devastating it became. I had to watch the final few scenes of this play through my hands. Oh my god, hey, my name is Mickey Joe and I am a professional theatre critic here on social media. This is my theatre-themed YouTube channel where I review many of the shows that I have been invited to go and see, and today I'm going to be telling you what I thought of People, Places and Things. Not that it honestly needs my seal of approval, because this is already a hugely successful production that was seen originally at the National Theatre, subsequently transferred to the Wyndham's Theatre, all of this being a few years back. To my eternal regret, I did not see the production the first time around. And honestly, I have no good reason for that. What could I possibly have been doing? Like, I'm fairly certain I was at university at the time, but that is absolutely no excuse. What I do know is that the production was hugely celebrated at the time, as was Denise Gough's central performance, and she won the Olivier Award. The show subsequently transferred off-Broadway as well, and to my great joy, it has just been remounted at the Trafalgar Theatre in the West End some years later. This is the same production, the same direction by Jeremy Herrin, the same design, many different cast members, but lead actress Denise Gough reprising her acclaimed performance. So needless to say, this time around I absolutely wasn't going to miss it. What I noticed, however, is that many of the other critics and industry professionals going to see this show were seeing it for a victory lap for the second or third time, reviewing it from the perspective of, is it as good as when we first loved it, which obviously is not my perspective. And if I'm being completely honest, it's taken me a little while to be ready to sit down and talk about this play, because it really haunted me. And before we even get into the plot and the creative choices and the performances and whether I think it lives up to the mythos and, the years of build-up that I had about this play, it would be super irresponsible of me not to flag that this is an incredibly triggering piece of theatre. If you don't personally like the word triggering or the idea of content advisories before a piece of theatre, then tough, they've existed for decades and they're very important. And the show focuses heavily on addiction and rehabilitation, and as such, there are many things that it depicts specifically which are quite visceral and quite graphic. This, there are trigger warnings necessary for this for multiple reasons, both for the most obvious reasons of the things which are depicted, also for a lot of sensory stuff. It is incredibly loud, it is incredibly bright. I'll talk more about why and how, but that's definitely something that you should consider if that is going to affect you. But then on an emotional level as well, it is incredibly challenging, incredibly hard-hitting in certain sections. Please, if you're considering going to see this play, read up about some of the content disclosures first, because I think it's important to do so. That all being said, I am now going to tell you what I thought of it. If you enjoyed today's review and you want to know my thoughts on other West End shows, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. Somewhere beneath this video is a notifications button. Feel free to turn that on, and then YouTube will let you know whenever I have new theatre reviews, theatre news videos, or theatre-going vlogs to share. You can also find me on other social media platforms. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok, where I share other shorter reviews of shows that I might not be talking about on here, and I'm also on the app formerly known as Twitter. I called it X in a video the other day, and this is my public apology for that. It didn't feel correct. Finally, as always, I know that many of you are discerning theatregoers, and I'm incredibly curious to hear what you thought of People, Places and Things. Did you get to see it the first time around? Did any of you see it off Broadway? Let me know what you think of this play. For now though, here is what I thought. People, Places and Things is a play written by Duncan Macmillan, all about the addiction and rehabilitation process, but it tells a wider story than that as well. I will explain. Principally, we are introduced to an actress who, during a performance of Anton Chekhov's The Seagull, is forgetting her lines and having some kind of a meltdown on stage. There is clearly a lot of substance abuse going on. Further to this, she checks herself into a rehabilitation facility, not because she necessarily believes in the process or self-identifies as an addict at that point, or thinks that she doesn't necessarily have the tools to help herself, but because she needs to officially be signed off and she needs a document declaring her fit to work so that she can be employed again. In these early scenes, we find out about a lot of the instability of her life and her relationships with her family and her recent circumstances, and it pretty quickly develops into this not unpredictable journey through the rehabilitation process, or at least it does for the first act. There is a fascinating scrutiny of the initial administrative stages of checking yourself into a rehabilitation facility. It is quite painstaking and quite agonizing at the beginning, all of which situates the audience to really feel the depth and the gravity and the challenge of this experience alongside our protagonist. And there are many creative choices within Jeremy Herrin's production and direction that do the same thing, but I'll talk about those in the next section. Now, the rehabilitation process is the familiar 12-step one, and we come to focus on one particular aspect of this, which are these group therapy meetings in which the participants, all of them, going through their own things and having their own histories and challenges that they are going to face when they emerge from the facility, when they carry on to pursue, more healthy, well-adjusted lifestyles. They meet in a group and sit in a supervised circle in order to practice conversations that they might have when they get out, or hypothetical conversations that are necessary for their recovery. And this becomes the thing that we focus on. This is something that our protagonist, Emma, immediately takes issue with on some level, despite the fact that she's an actress. And within the context of the writing, it is used as a tool through which we get to learn about the personalities and the circumstances of the other people in the group. And they are introduced, but not really fully explored. We find out a lot of personal details about other members of the group, other people who are in the facility, but we don't really get the chance to meet them. And this is an interesting inverse to our relationship with Emma, the protagonist at this point, because there are many things we still don't know about her, and there are many facts that they still don't know about her. We begin to introduce the idea that she's not necessarily being completely truthful with the way that she is introducing herself or characterizing herself or her circumstances, but we feel like we know her a lot more intimately because the time that we have spent with her navigating the early stages of this process, which in itself is a pretty fascinating study in what it really means to know someone, and that's something that the play toys with a lot. Throughout this, there are moments of hardship, there are sorrowful, grief-stricken revelations. There are also these very twisted comic moments, occasionally juxtaposed. Occasionally we will delve further into grief just to find this blackly comic twist right at the bottom of the thing. There are also moments of reflective peace utilized by Duncan Macmillan to explore Emma's perspective on, this therapeutic process and what she thinks about it, contrasted by moments of complete cacophony, all of which together illustrates one of the greatest assets of this play, I think, which is its unique point of view on addiction and rehabilitation, because there are elements within Emma's point of view that I think we can understand and relate to and maybe even agree with, but there are also such extreme heights to her manic behavior that we can't support in the same way. Her perspective is also challenged by the people around her, but at the same time we are so tethered to her as a protagonist that, we have no choice but to go on her with this journey. If she gets thrown out of the facility for the way that she is behaving, then that's where we're going as well. And what's even more interesting is the first act of this thing provides all of the context to what is going to happen in the second, because when the interval arrived, we've seen a lot of really tremendous theatre, but from a writing perspective, I was struggling to discern the point of the whole thing. And that is because the second act brings it into such painfully sharp focus, the consequences of which are a little challenging for me to fully talk about without going into a couple of spoilers. So if you don't want to hear about those, skip ahead to the next section. But as we see Emma returning to the rehabilitation process after a relapse with a renewed determination to take it seriously in a slightly different approach, and doing so more successfully, we once again explore this group therapy setting in which they are practicing conversations to be had in the real world, in which they are rehearsing these conversations. And there is one particular scene that crystallizes the entire effing thing for me, where Emma is talking about the irony, I guess, of her career as an actress and certain things she's experienced in her career, and the nature of rehearsal, the nature of pretense and of self-characterization. And it's this whole allegory that opens the entire thing up, where her being an actress is so vitally important to the play, because that's the same thing that they're doing in group therapy. And it's not just the small detail of them rehearsing conversations that might happen with their loved ones, with people they have harmed in their past once they leave, but it's the entire concept of what it means to lead a better life and become a better person, and the rehearsal for that characterization of yourself and for that lifestyle. And like I said, not that I wasn't enjoying the character study of the first act and the vivid detail of the rehab process and this facility and treatment and all of those ideas, but the concept of addiction and rehabilitation as performance is so much bigger than that and opens it up to such exciting possibilities and such exciting dramatic possibilities which take place. Now I really am going to talk about some spoilers because I do not know of another play where the last 15-20 minutes are as consequential, as much of a complete shift as they are in People, Places and Things. If you've seen this already, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because my goodness, the last section of this play. So having spent the entire thing in this treatment facility, we are transported for the very last part of the play to Emma's parents' home, which she returns to after she has recovered. And it's the conversation with them about her not having been emotionally present during the death of her brother, their son, that she had been rehearsing with the group. And critically, her parents are played by the same actors who played the people within the facility who were portraying those roles in order to facilitate her practicing that conversation. At the time, she had noted to them that they were responding in a way that was much more supportive than her parents actually would, and they had told her that people might surprise you when you are honest. Lo and behold, we find out that Emma was correct, because the way that her parents respond to her is to announce that they find this self-actualized version of her where she's trying to be more self-aware and take responsibility. They find it to be still deeply self-centered, and they still haven't gotten over all of the things that she did in her past, and they think that her doing this work for herself and on herself doesn't begin to make reparations for the way that she behaved. And it's a really blistering section of the play where, because we still feel so tethered to her and we feel innately proud, and we've seen the mountain that she has climbed to get to this point, and we know the work that she has done to get there, and we want to see that celebrated, we feel so incredibly emotionally wounded, and as though we're also on the receiving end of this same lambasting from her parents, which is packed full of completely heart-shattering moments. One of the most devastating is when we find out that her mother, who she had asked to get rid of all of the alcohol and drugs that were in her home, had brought that box to the family home, to Emma's childhood bedroom, and that was there within her reach. The play talks a lot about the idea of the people, the places, and the things that will trigger relapse, and she had confessed already that the people were her parents, the place was her childhood bedroom, and the things were suddenly there as well. So it all comes together in a very brutal way. But just when you're ready to paint her parents as thoughtless villains for not understanding, her journey and everything that she's been through and what it means to be a recovering addict, and that they are wrong to put so much of this blame on her, we feel one final betrayal as the audience, because even though we've spent the entire play watching her being more vulnerable and being more open and revealing more of the reality of her life, there is one last twist, because her mother leaves the room and calls her Rachel, which is not the name we knew her by this entire time. We knew she'd used a fake name earlier, but we thought Emma was then the real one. It's the moment everyone talks about when they come out of this play. And so it's that conversation, which goes about as wrong as it can, that puts the entire thing in context. And it's the moment that the whole thing is building towards, which I think is a ballsy move in terms of dramatic structure, for it all to crystallize very much at the end. But it leaves you leaving the auditorium on such a high, because we spend the whole play ramping up to this final moment, and then there's a short epilogue, but we basically finish at the absolute climax of the thing dramatically. Of course, there is an awful lot of brilliant creative work that goes into supporting that as well. So let me tell you about how this production works and the work of this creative team. So this, like I said, is the original production, which was directed by Jeremy Herrin, whose work I have enjoyed many times. Occasionally I feel as though it lacks a little bit of necessity, but not here, because this play is consistently compelling and vital and urgent, but occupies enough space to have meaningful conversations, and critically manages to really shock us. Now, if I was to try and pin down the overall creative vision, I do think an enormous part of it is situating us as the audience in Emma's perspective as she is navigating both the addiction and the rehabilitation process, because there are bright flashing lights and oppressive soundscapes and doubles on stage dressed as her, all to be very visually disorientating. Then for so much of it to take place in these group therapy scenes, it is actually staged in traverse with a few rows of onstage seating, not nearly as many people as are in the main auditorium, but enough to give it that effect of playing to traverse, of having the audience surrounding the thing. And we feel as though we're beginning to come into that circle. It's at this point that I should mention Bunny Christie's set design, and it's a very Bunny Christie set design, which is a great thing. For 90% of the play, it's all bright and very white and light and geometric shapes. It's conjuring the idea of a hospital and of recovery, and also of, this very clean, very open space. And especially when contrasted with the other location that we visit, which is Emma's childhood bedroom in her parents' house, which literally descends from above to surround her and is much smaller and feels necessarily claustrophobic, but also detailed and full of things and full of memories. That other space, the very open, very white one, isn't full of her life. It's, like I said, it's a clean page for her to live on before she has to return to difficult reality. I also think, as well as hospitals, it invokes the idea of purgatory just a little bit, of this space where you could make one of two choices, where you could either go on to a better version of your life and ascend to that, or descend to, something even worse. A sort of a fork in the road for the soul, if you like. And they talk in the play about the role of faith and spirituality and organized religion, I guess, as well, in the rehabilitation process and within their doctrine, this being one of the things that Emma takes issue with, perhaps reasonably. But the reward of the thing, I think, is that Duncan Macmillan's script and Jeremy Herron's direction work hand in hand in order to transport us to Emma's headspace, to make us feel as though we are living behind her eyes as she is going through all of this. Of course, that only works with a fantastic central performance. So let me tell you about the cast, but principally about Denise Gough. Now, Denise, after having performed in the show's first run, has been public about substance abuse issues in her past, and true enough, there is an awful lot of reality and authenticity in her performance here. And it's not hugely theatrical in the same way that we've seen in a lot of, the great theatre performances, like a lot of these one-person shows. She's not doing a lot of demonstrable acting. She is quite visibly the same person the entire time, and she undergoes a change of perspective, and we can see a certain amount of healing that takes place, and we can discern the differences in her personality and in, I guess, her mental state. But it's not that she changes all of her opinions completely. We just see her soften to different ideas. It's all incredibly naturalistic. It's all very real. It is also a force of a thing. Like, she digs her fingernails into this script and this character, and she draws blood in 10 different spots. It's one of those performances that seems indefatigable and yet exhausting, and it's harrowing, and it's blistering, and she seems to be torturing herself with this life on stage. That she can be such a satisfying and functional protagonist while being, for much of the first act, very emotionally inaccessible to the other characters around us, for perhaps the entire thing not being truthful, being, a theatrical, unreliable narrator to the audience, is fascinating to me. And I think a lot of that is because whether or not there is reality and fact within the things that she is saying, we can understand the difference within her performance of when she's choosing to share truth. It's a difference between truth and fact. What is real to her that has a reality and has an honesty, whether or not all of the details are necessarily what they appear to be. And even though I talked about that very real consistency in her performance, where it's not completely transformative, the way that she plays those subtle shifts, the way that we see her, getting more frenzied in the first act because she's experiencing withdrawal, the way that we then see the difference between that and her return at the start of the second act, the way that we experience her right at the end of the second act, the way that we see what recovery looks like to her, and challenges that she faces thereafter. Fascinating, utterly fascinating, brilliantly portrayed, but portrayed with such subtlety, with such nuance, with such depth, with such meaning. Truly, it's one of the great stage performances, not because you're watching this projecting Shakespearean, Herculean theatrical feat, but because you're just watching a very believable, real person spiraling in and out of control on stage. And that's not always easy to watch, but it is incredibly gripping. Now, Denise isn't alone on stage. She is joined by an extensive supporting cast, many of whom we don't meet all that meaningfully, but it's a wonderful ensemble collaboration that we see, as in many sort of National Theatre originated shows. Some of the best work is done by Sinead Cusack, who plays a handful of roles, because when we go into this facility, we begin to get the sense, and we're sort of told as much, that the way that Emma is perceiving the thing is, again, not necessarily in line with reality, because Sinead plays two different professionals that we meet in the facility, a doctor as well as a therapist, who Emma remarks reminds her of her mum, or she's seeing her mum when she talks to her. And so, true enough, Sinead also plays her mum at the end. And there are going to be some spoilers here. If you skipped over that section at the beginning, you're going to want to skip ahead again now, because the coup here, the really brilliant gut punch of this casting approach, is that we have met her twice already in these roles that have an awful lot of crossover, that may sort of like take Emma to task a little bit, but in a very reassuring, supportive, maternal way. And so we expect that to be the same relationship with her mother, because they don't just blindly support her, like there's a little bit of confrontation there, but ultimately they're still on her side. And when we meet her mother, it is very much not the case. And there's so much more confrontation, and there is so much more just like a lack of understanding, and she is not doing any of the things that she needs her to, and they're just utterly failing to hear each other, really. But it's an excellently set up surprise for us as the audience, who are expecting yet another maternal figure from Sinead Cusack. Interesting footnote, I'm pretty sure the last time I saw Sinead on stage was in Other Desert Cities at the Old Vic, where she also plays a slightly cold mother figure who is talking about possibly disowning her daughter over the loss of a son. There's a lot of overlap in these two characterizations, and so much of what she does so brilliantly is this cold quality and this bite done behind the eyes, done behind the very reasonable and understanding facade of, you know, just a mother experiencing grief, but experiencing it in a very conservative, emotionally repressed way. It's a great portrayal of perhaps a narcissistic parent withholding affection. Kevin McGonagall also appears in this scene towards the end of the play as Emma's dad, and also does some really difficult work there, as well as playing one of the more volatile members of the rehabilitation facility, one of the more volatile patients, that is. We also get some very valuably grounding performances, very real performances from Danny Carraine, Ryan Hutton, and Malachi Kirby. Malachi plays the patient who forges the most substantial relationship with Emma in the facility, and in that guise does a lot of brilliant work as well. From a writing perspective, his character is ostensibly just a tool in order to excavate more details about her life and sort of key memories for her, but he does a fantastic job in characterizing that with enough color and enough intrigue to make those scenes compelling and not feel as though just a writing exercise. So to finish then, who would I encourage to go and see this play? I'm going to reiterate what I said at the beginning about looking online at the National Theatre website and finding out about the content warnings for this particular piece of theatre. There are many other themes within it that I didn't talk about explicitly. There are many things that are shown which I didn't talk about explicitly, but between the very visceral staging and the hard-hitting writing, there's an awful lot within this that may put you at unease. Please, please, please have a look at that before you go and see the play. If you decide that you still want to go and see this remarkable piece of theatre, I encourage you to do so. It really is, I mean, probably one of the greatest stage performances from Denise Gough that you could see in the West End right now. Probably one of the great plays, one of the great pieces of theatre, I would say, over at the Trafalgar Theatre. And specifically, if you like your theatre to be hard-hitting and soul-searing, that is exactly what you are going to get with this. So if you want to go and see a powerful, powerful play that talks about addiction and rehabilitation, go and see People, Places and Things this summer in the West End. Of course, if you already have, I am very intrigued to hear what you thought. Please comment with all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. Anyone else reading the comment section, bear in mind there may be spoilers, tread carefully. For now though, that is everything that I have to say about this play. I hope that you enjoyed this review. I hope that I did a good job in articulating how I felt about it. Like I said, I've really been quite haunted by this one. I don't know if I will return to it, because I think that first experience of it is such a powerful one, and I do wonder if that's a component of, reviews being different for critics who saw it a second time around. I think that first time you see it is going to be unlike no other. But I am also wondering what my relationship to it and to the first act would be, having now seen the entire thing and knowing the path that we're walking down, if you like. So maybe I will, before the end of the summer, watch this space. In the meantime, like I said, I hope that you enjoyed watching this review or listening to this if you're listening to it as a podcast. And I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!